The sun beat down on the dry plains as 12-year-old Annie dragged a worn broom across the wide porch of the McAllister Ranch, her tiny frame almost swallowed by the wooden handle, her bare feet blackened by dirt, her dress little more than rags stitched together from kindness, given by townsfolk who pitied her. Yet despite the blistering heat and the weight of her hunger, she swept with a determination that seemed too big for someone so small, because in her heart she believed that if she worked hard enough, if she kept her head low enough, someone might notice her, someone might say she mattered. But the ranch hands mostly ignored her, tossing her scraps of bread when they thought of it, treating her like a shadow, until one morning the ranch owner himself, a tall, weathered cowboy named Thomas McAllister, pausing when he saw the little girl sweeping a porch too large for her tiny hands. And though he had seen many orphans pass through town, something about the way this child moved, the grit in her jaw, the quiet fire in her eyes stirred something in him, and with a slow drawl, he called out, "Little one, who told you this whole ranch needed sweepin'?" And when she looked up at him, sweat on her brow, her voice was small but steady, "Nobody, sir. I just thought maybe if I worked hard enough, I could belong somewhere." Thomas was a man the whole county feared, a rancher whose name was spoken with respect, and whose land stretched farther than the eye could see. But behind that reputation lay a heart carved hollow by loss, and when he heard the orphan's words, it was like a ghost from the past whispering in his ear. For once upon a time he'd held a daughter just her age, only to bury her beneath a willow tree after sickness stole her away. And though he had sworn never to open his heart again, never to risk the pain of losing someone he loved, he found himself walking down those porch steps toward the little girl, his boots heavy on the wood, his shadow falling over her as he asked, "What's your name, child?" And when she whispered Annie, he nodded slowly, repeating it like a promise. Annie. Then, with a sigh that carried years of grief, he took the broom from her small hands, set it aside, and crouched so his eyes met hers. "This ranch don't need sweepin', Annie, it needs someone with heart, and I reckon you've got more of that than half the men workin' for me." And though she blinked in confusion, unsure if this was kindness or mockery, Thomas surprised himself by reaching out and placing a rough, calloused hand gently on her shoulder, a gesture so simple yet so powerful that Annie, who had never known a father's touch, felt her throat tighten, and for the first time in years, Thomas McAllister's heart stirred with something dangerous but beautiful, the thought that maybe, just maybe, he could love again. The days that followed were strange for Annie, for instead of being chased away or ignored, she found herself given small tasks by Thomas himself, not out of punishment but out of trust: feeding the chickens, carrying water, even learning how to brush the horses in the stable. And though the ranch hands grumbled at first, muttering that the old man had gone soft, they couldn't deny the girl's spirit, how she worked harder than men twice her size, never complaining, never asking for more than a crust of bread and a place to rest her head in the barn. And every evening Thomas would watch from the porch, pipe in hand, studying her with an expression few had ever seen on his face, a softness that made some of the men fall silent, for they knew the wounds that haunted him. Yet here was this child somehow stitching them back together with nothing but her stubborn will to keep going. And one night, as the stars stretched wide across the black sky, Annie sat on the steps clutching her knees, whispering to herself that she didn't deserve kindness, that sooner or later someone would send her away like always. But Thomas, overhearing, walked out and sat beside her, his voice low and steady. "Annie, listen to me, this ranch ain't just mine anymore. It's ours, and as long as I've got breath in me, you'll have a place here, not because you earned it with a broom, but because you've got a spirit too strong to waste." And when she turned to him with tears shining in her wide eyes, she felt, for the first time in her short, hard life, what it meant to truly belong. But belonging was not without its trials, and soon the McAllister Ranch found itself under threat, for a band of ruthless cattle thieves swept through the territory, stealing stock and burning barns. And one fateful night the ranch was lit by fire, the air filled with shouts and gunfire as Thomas and his men scrambled to defend their land. And though he ordered Annie to hide, the little orphan refused, racing into the smoke-filled stables where terrified horses reared and screamed, her small body darting between flames as she untied ropes and slapped the animals free. And when Thomas saw her emerge coughing from the smoke, a horse's reins clutched in her hand, his heart nearly broke with fear and pride. For in that moment she was not a helpless child, but a lion-hearted soul, braver than men 3 times her size. And when the thieves finally fled and the flames died down, Thomas scooped her into his arms, holding her as though he'd never let go, whispering fiercely, "You're mine now. Annie, you hear me? Mine to protect, mine to love, mine to call my daughter." And though she could barely breathe from smoke and tears, she nodded against his chest, clutching his shirt with tiny fists, because in that moment the orphan who had once been invisible to the world was finally, undeniably claimed, casting long shadows across the land. But where there had been fear and destruction, there was now something stronger: hope, built not of wood or fences but of the bond between a broken man and a forgotten child. And as Thomas stood with Annie beside him, their hands clasped tight, the ranch hands gathered in silence, tipping their hats in quiet respect, for they knew the McAllister Ranch had changed forever, not because of fire or thieves but because love had found its way back to its owner's heart. And when the preacher came later that week at Thomas's request, papers in hand, the adoption was made official, the ink sealing what had already been written in their souls, that Annie was no longer an orphan but Annie McAllister, daughter of a cowboy, heir to a legacy of land, strength, and love. And as she stood tall in her new boots, Thomas's hand resting proudly on her shoulder, the people of Red River whispered that sometimes family wasn't born of blood but of choice, and that sometimes the hardest hearts could be softened by the smallest hands. And in that truth lay a story that would be told for generations, the tale of a little orphan who swept a porch with all her might, only to sweep her way into a man's heart. And together they found what they thought they'd lost forever: a home and friends. If Annie's story touched your heart and reminded you that love can be found in the most unexpected places, don't write off just yet. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more.